Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to Commute Talk. It is Friday, fun, 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 and hope everybody's looking forward to the weekend. So, Rockire writes in, and he says that he likes to listen to these videos while eating. So, bon appetit to you, Rockire. And he's asking about code design and architecture. How do I approach that? And how do I ensure that I build the correct abstractions? So that's an interesting question. And it's not really something that I think that much about because this is very much an intuitive process for me at this point. But let me try to talk about it and see what I can come up with. So I guess I approach code architecture starting from the API and then working my way backwards to the implementation. Sort of like Steve Jobs would say, right? Like that you start with the customer and then you work your way backwards to the technology. I think that's what he said. Anyways, yeah, so start with the API, work backwards to the implementation. And what I mean by that is that I tend to start any new thing by just trying to sketch out the API for what I want to do. Like I make up these pretend objects. I've talked about this before. Like these pretend objects, and then I add these pretend functions to them, and I write some actual C++ code that uses this API to achieve something, even though it's just dummies, right? Because this exercise, it shows me, or it allows me to discover what the objects should be, what the different classes should be, and like it lets me see like what should the lifetimes be, what's the object model, what's the ownership model, and it's just like these little cues that you get that, for instance, you can tell, oh, well, this object needs to survive the scope that it's created in, so it probably shouldn't go on the stack, and maybe this object has 2 logical owners or more, then it needs to be reference counted, and things like that, and and then you also discover what things you need to expose in those objects by adding the APIs one by one as you come across the need for them. If you contrast this to like the reverse approach, which would be like starting with the data and working your way up to the API, then I find that if I do that, then it's very often a case of like spending a bunch of time writing out a class that I put all the data I have into it, and then I just expose all that data, and then I'm sitting there with this big object that has no like clear purpose or no clear direction where to go with it. It feels more like a row in a database than anything. So I don't know, like that to me, it's much harder to discover what to do with a huge object with lots of data than it is to discover what I could do if I have the use case call site in mind, and I just like invent what I need as I need it. But maybe this doesn't work for everyone. It's just something that works really well for me, because then I end up with these kind of tightly scoped objects, and then it tends to be easier to refactor as you're discovering like what the design should be, sort of organically. Then it's easier to refactor and improve on your object model as you go if it doesn't have like a million like getters and setters and a million data members and stuff. Yeah. And I guess I should also say that I'm very willing to throw things away and start over, which is an important synergy with this starting with the API, because when you start with the API, then it's so much easier to throw it away and start over, as opposed to when you start with the implementation. Because if you do the API first, then you very quickly discover like, well, this is not going to work, right? And then you can just throw it away and do it differently. Whereas if you already built this huge data structure, then you can I have a tendency, I don't know about everyone, but for me, like it very easily makes me sort of subconsciously married to the data structure, and I just want to keep it, and I don't want to do it over again or do it differently. So I sort of stretch that data structure to fit what I think the new design should be, and I think the design ends up worse as a result. But really, like this whole thing that I'm describing here is it's like a subconscious, intuitive process for me. It's not really something that I'm like consciously thinking, okay, now do this. But it used to be a conscious process. So this is just something that I developed with experience, and yeah, I think everyone eventually gets to the point where they start to think in like higher and higher levels of abstraction about what they're doing, and this for me is like this natural process now. Anyways, I hope that answers your question, and I hope your meal is good. So I guess we have time for another question here, because it's just 6 minutes so far. So there was another question from a swell guy who wrote asking how to get better at code reading. And well, first things first, you should do lots of it. But that's obvious, right? But it's really true. Like, you got to read code to get better at reading code. But I will say that if you want to get better at reading code twice as fast as your friend, then you should probably interact with the code at the same time. And what I mean by that is that you should build the code that you're reading and mess with it. Add print statements, add functionality, reorder the code, restructure it, write it in there like, oh, this isn't how I would write this. I would try to do it this way instead, and like just screw around with it, because that will dramatically improve your absorption rate, or whatever you would call it. Like you will understand so much more of the code so much faster if you interact with it. And also make sure that you read different projects, like go out and look at code and interact with code from different projects, not just like the same one over and over, because code is a lot like people in that way. Like everyone has something that they can teach another person, right? And every code repository has something that you can learn from it. Whether it's like exposing you to a new pattern, or just reaffirming your existing beliefs about something. But you can always learn something valuable from anything. Of course, some things carry more value than others. So after a while, it becomes important to like try to pick valuable targets. But when you're a beginner, or like when it's early in your programming life, then quantity is far more important than quality, in my opinion. Like, you just got to read lots of it and screw around with it, because your own quality is like not that great in the beginning. So that shouldn't stop anyone. Like, just go and write lots of code, read lots of code, screw around with code, and then I guess finally I would also say that if you end up messing with some project's code while you're reading that code, and you learn something, and then you accidentally improve something, or you realize you added some feature that's kind of neat, then I would encourage you to go and start a dialogue with the maintainer of that code and see if they're interested in your changes, or interested in helping you refine them and integrating them into the repository. Because like that's the part of it is like, that's the beauty of open source, right? Like, that we can help each other improve our code. But also that's like the final tier of like code reading self-improvement, is having a dialogue about the code with an expert. Now, that's something that will really, really dramatically improve your code reading ability, because when you talk with an expert on the code that you just read and you just modified, then you will start to absorb some of his like very, very strong understanding. I mean, what I assume is his very strong understanding of that code. And that will be very, very helpful for you. And engaging in a conversation with someone who knows the code way better than you do forces you to like push your understanding to its limit. And yeah, that's I guess those are my tips for that. So now we are at a more reasonable video length, and I'm getting closer to work here, so I guess I'll cut myself off. A 2-question video once. That's nice. All right, so I guess I'll say thank you everyone for sending in questions. It's really nice of you, because we get to talk about stuff that's interesting and stuff I don't think of. So please keep sending more questions so that I can talk forever. And I hope everyone has a lovely day. And I thank you for hanging out with me on the commute. And see you guys next time. Bye.